what's up? Hello, I hope you all are doing well. As we come to the end of nonfiction November here, I just wanted to sort of turn attention to something else that Olive over at A Book Olive had created, which is the Boujee Booktuber Tag, which is a really sort of interesting look at books and value and cost. And so I really enjoyed her video, which is the original, and I'll link it in the box below, but I wanted to do this tag just because it was an area that I found fascinating and something that I also think that we don't talk too much about here on BookTube unless it becomes like a dramatic moment. So with that said, let's begin. Question 1 is, what is your average monthly budget for books? Nothing. I can't actually say that I put a figure down monthly or yearly or anything like that. I've actually never budgeted for books, even in the period of time when I was in college and was spending way too many Saturdays at Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. Just to be clear, for anyone that lives in Washington, D.C., the original one. And I always came home from that afternoon whenever I was there with something and like was consciously looking at like, wow, you really spent a lot of money this Saturday. But I've moved a lot in the last 5 years and I've really found that carting books around is not a lot of fun. And where I live right now, there is a really great library consortium system and I live ridiculously close to the library itself. And if I do want a book, I'm far more inclined to just sort of go down the street and get something from the library or put it on hold and have it brought to me from another library rather than to go out and buy it. So I haven't really ever, or at least not in the past 5 years or so, had cause to budget for books at all, and I'm just not particularly inclined to. Question 2 is, what's the most you've ever spent in a bookstore? My guess, and I really haven't kept considerable track of this, my guess is about $40, which is an interesting amount because it was only for one book. It was for my vintage copy of Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Even in my like Politics and Prose book buying phase when I was in college, I always tried to keep it pretty low, except for those moments when I realized that some Saturdays were more expensive than others. Like I said, I really don't have an exact figure, and I also don't love like the heft that comes with hardcover books. I mean, sometimes that's really nice, but I don't gravitate toward them. I would prefer a paperback, actually. And so that really enables me when I do purchase books to not spend a lot because paperbacks are generally less expensive than hardcover books. I mean, that and going to the library or getting books secondhand really keeps my bookstore spending rather low. Question 3 is, are you willing to pay full price for a brand new release or wait until you have a coupon or if there's a sale? Again, like I can't really pick from any of these things in the question because normally when I find out a release date, I feverishly check for the first moment that I can put it on hold at the library. For instance, I'm reading or have read this year both of the books in the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, and the third one is going to come out in the United States in February, and I'm checking like every week for the day that gets pre-ordered by the library when I can put it on hold. So to answer the question, almost none of the above. I would probably, if I really did want to buy it, wait until I could find a used copy of it somewhere. If I really want to read something at the publication date, I will probably go and get it from the library, but the one exception that I can think of is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which came out last fall. I bought that day of and full price because I definitely like gave into the hype of it and had heard a lot of really great things about it, and I just sort of wanted to own a copy of that book. But other than that, I probably will get things from the library, and I'm realizing as I'm answering these questions that this makes me sound super cheap. But honestly, my relationship to owning stuff, like material stuff, has changed a lot in the last 5 years, especially things that are gonna sit on a shelf and collect dust and fade and are flammable, honestly, as books are. Unless I really think about like, am I going to reread this? Is this a reference book? Do I want to acquire multiple copies of this personally so that I can lend them out and be a lending library? If there's a book that I am for some reason super excited about and totally want to share with other people and I can find used copies of it, I'll probably buy them that way. But I've really started to look at my book buying differently because a library will often buy multiple copies of a title rather than just one, like an individual person would. And they will buy more over time as they wear out. And that supports the author a little bit more than one single purchase would. And I also really believe in the existence of those institutions. So it's important to me to go there and check items out, which helps increase their circulation numbers, especially at my local branch, which can then, even though it shouldn't have to, help them justify their existence. So yeah, I guess I'm not really willing to do any of the 3 things in that question, pay full price or wait for a coupon or a sale. I would rather just support the library, except in very, very specific instances. Question 4, would you rather buy one new book or several less expensive used copies? I'm guessing this means not several copies of the same book. But even if it did, I would still also say yes. I'd rather buy several less expensive used copies of books. I'm not overly jazzed, as you can probably tell by now, anymore about new books, not on the whole, unless they have some sort of great cosmic significance for me or something. I'd rather find a greater variety of used things, or like a few copies of one text that I could lend out. Like, for example, I have a few used copies of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman that I lend out because I'm really interested in getting that book in people's hands. And sometimes the people to whom I want to give that book are, regrettably, not library inclined. So if I want someone to read something, or I've recommended something to someone and I really think that they should read it and they want to read it, it's kind of either on them to go and buy it, or I can just say, hey, I already have a copy, let me lend it to you. And quite honestly, I really have started to prefer used books at this point, and like I see no problem with them. And that feels almost a little bit sacrilegious to say in this community sometimes, but books are really just copies of a single text, and they're recyclable, and libraries do get rid of them, and when things get old and fall apart, librarians will throw them in the recycling bin. And sometimes they even do that once they get too old, or they need to make space for newer materials that are getting more attention. Like, it's not evil to get rid of books. It's just one copy of something that exists and can be reproduced. Most of the time. I'm not talking like special collections of, you know, we're not talking about like the Magna Carta here, the original document. And books are friends, but in reality, they're honestly just copies. So I'm really not fussed about having to read something that somebody else has already bent the spine on. Question 5 is, what do you think a reasonable price is for a hardcover book? What about a paperback or an ebook? By now, I think it should be clear that I'm the worst person to maybe ask this question of. If you do want to own a book, I think a reasonable price to me is $18 for a hardcover book and $9 for a paperback, so half. I can't really speak to ebooks because I do not read them. And I'm very, very irritated right now by one particular publisher's relationship around embargoing ebook sales to libraries. And if you're more interested in that topic, I will put a link below for you to check that out, because that's a fascinating thing that's going on right now. So I should probably just stay out of the whole thing about ebook pricing. The 2 that I mentioned before are probably not realistic prices, and to really answer this question well, what I would want to do is a lot of market research around copy editing and cover design and printing costs and sourcing of paper materials and average pay for staff time and all that, to give you a real estimate of what it would cost to make a book. And I could go and do all of that work, and I would want to give this question a really, really thorough answer, because people getting paid for the work that goes into making a book is important to me. And I'd also be interested to know what the average publisher markup is for a text. But without doing that research and just sort of off the top of my head, those are prices that I would feel comfortable paying. They're probably a little bit low given today's economy, but who knows? I probably have not bought a full price book in over a year, so maybe I'm just out of the loop. Question 6, is a signed book worth more to you? Well, how about a first edition? If I took the book to get it signed by the author, then yes, I think it is worth more to me personally. If it's my copy of The Fault in Our Stars that, you know, the whole first printing was signed by John Green, then yes. If it's my used copy of My Italian Bulldozer that I got my mom for Mother's Day that was signed by Alexander McCall Smith, sure. But any random signed copy, like if I see something in a store and it has a sticker on it that says that it's signed, not really. That's not necessarily more valuable. It doesn't really carry more worth to me, although I'm sure intrinsically in a real market situation it does. First editions, I guess not. I've kind of moved out of my collector phase, so I'm not that fussed To be honest, I'm like really not. Question 7 is, what is your most valuable book? Either sentimental or actual value. Speaking of editions, I have a 14th edition of, like I mentioned before, Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. That's worth something, which is why I paid so much for that children's book, but probably not very much in the long run. Mainly my books are of sentimental value, and they are those that were either given to me as a very small child that I've read over and over, like storybooks that I was given when I was really young, or my collection of hardcover Harry Potter books that I took ages to collect over a period of years that are really special to me. I don't know why I was like so hung up on building that collection, particularly of hardcover books, probably because of the jacket illustrations. Like I went through a period where I needed to own all 7 of them in hardcover in addition to the softcover copies that I had gotten for free or been given or whatever. Like I had to have the full set. And I actually found a copy of Goblet of Fire secondhand in perfect condition for $5, so I'm good at this game. My vintage Trixie Belden books are definitely hard to find now. I have a really old copy of Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I definitely co-opted from my dad and will never give back, but it's super tattered and holds a lot of great memories, so like those are valuable to me. Question 8 is, will you pay more for a cover or edition that you like better? Yes, if I am gonna pay for a new book, I want the cover that I want. If I'm looking for a book specifically and I don't mind that it's used, I will continue to look for it used until I find the cover that I want. My copies of Emma and Little Women that are both the Penguin Threads edition, I definitely paid more for those. I mean, like, have you seen them? I'm not really stoked about reading any of the other titles, so I won't like buy them just to have the set or anything. But when I went to get that copy of Emma, I knew I wanted that cover. Like, this is the cover that I wanted to have. Little Women actually is a title that is another exception for me. I have 2 copies of it, and I always want another. I almost actually bought myself the Puffin in Bloom edition like 3 times. I keep seeing it everywhere and I always talk myself out of buying it because I don't feel like I need 3 copies of Little Women. And I'd actually like to own the entire Puffin in Bloom collection, but I just can't. I just can't justify it. So I don't like the other titles enough to buy it. But for a cover that I really do want, I will probably pay more for it if I'm gonna pay for a book. Question 9, what physical characteristics does a good quality book have? If it's hardcover, it's bound tightly. The end papers are like an appropriate weight and GSM, preferably in a dark color. The jacket being a good GSM too, with a textured cover. Pages are easily turnable. They're not like tissue paper or anything. The contrast between the paper color and the darkness of the ink needs to be there so that it's easily legible. For a paperback, it also needs to be bound tightly. Cut at right angles, no like sideways cutting from the machine that like funny angles, no rough edges, and a textured paper cover. See also like any of the orange Penguin UK classics, and again that thing about the distinction between the color of the paper and the depth of color in the ink. I have really specific thoughts about what books ought to feel like, apparently. We've just learned this right now. Question 10 is, if you won the lottery, what bookish things would you do with the money? Does it not by now sound like a substantial library donation would be in order? But if I'm also being totally honest, probably getting a 3rd copy of Little Women. And the bonus question here is, give us an image, actual or mental, of your dream home library. If I'm gonna continue to put books in my house, if I'm gonna continue to collect them, then it's gonna be half a wall with 1 shelf for each thing I need, reference materials and texts that are related to my work, nonfiction, fiction, singular shelf from my aggressively collected hardcover series, Harry Potter series, cookbooks and old notebooks underneath that, and a slight space for decorative items like nameplates or a little place that I could put a jar of my bookmarks in, or like a fancy pen, or a candle, but obviously not a lit candle on a wooden shelf full of flammable items. So that's that. That is the Boujee Booktuber tag. Like I said, if you want to go check out Olive's original video, the link is below. If you are interested in this tag, it's kind of a lot to think about. It really brings out a lot of your own personal preferences. I didn't learn too much about myself doing it, but definitely solidified some feelings that I knew I had. So highly recommend, if this interests you, please do the tag. Maybe if I can convince her, Bex will even do it at my insistence, and then you'll get both of our answers to this as well. That being said, thank you so much for watching. Anything that you do want to know about us is in the description. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives, and we will see you very soon.